you'll be interested when I send you a copy of the book to learn how very similar all the backgrounds are.
Yeah, even though they may have come from different ethnic backgrounds,
Right.
different racial backgrounds, different stratas of income, basically they have that ability, I think, to see the ridiculous in a normal situation. That the average person just, would look at it and observe it. The comedian looks at it and looks at it in a little bit different way and makes a comment on it.
And you don't really think that it's possible to learn that?
I think no, not really. I don't think you can teach somebody to be a comedian. I think you can learn timing to a certain extent, stage presence, what material is good and bad, but I don't think you can create the overall attitude that makes a successful performer. I think there has to be something there in the psyche that is there.
But it's intangible.
Yes, you just can't define it. Hell, I have to go back with Stan Laurel, and somebody says, "What's comedy?" And he says, "How the hell should I know? What makes people laugh? I don't know what makes people laugh. I know devices that make people laugh, but I don't know why people laugh, and I don't think any comedian."
And the very devices that you might use might not work for somebody else?
Certainly, that's true. I don't think anybody knows why people laugh. They do. George Burns, I'm sure if you talk with George, he says, he says, if they laugh at it, it's funny. Comedy is relative. Everything is relative in comedy. Tragedy, no. If you go to see a serious play, everybody that sees that serious play will come out with almost the same reaction. If something is sad, it's sad. If you have a scene in a play where somebody is dying of cancer, that's sad, and that will affect everybody in that audience pretty much the same. But when you walk out and do a piece of humorous business, it's not going to affect everybody the same because it is all relative to their own individual experience with it. How do they relate to it? So this is what somebody says when they say, does he have a sense of humor? Everybody has a sense of humor. So when somebody says he's got a great sense of humor, that again is subject to, in relation to what? Hell, I know people who couldn't stand Fred Allen and people who loved him. I know people who hated Laurel and Hardy, couldn't see anything funny that they did, and other people who think they're the greatest. So that's what you're dealing in when you're talking about what makes people laugh. It's all relative.
I once heard a fellow say that having a sense of humor was as personal as a toothache.
That's it,
It's that specific. John, when you ad-lib a line that you feel will get a laugh, did that sentence actually form in your mind before you delivered it, or did it just come out?
Sometimes you are ahead of it, and sometimes you just say it very quickly. Sometimes without even thinking. Sometimes you'll be formulating the line. If you can see where the conversation's going, and you think you might get to that point, then you are kind of prepared for it. Other times somebody will say something, and you react immediately. For example, the other night, we had a fellow on the show, weighed 500 pounds. I don't know if you saw him or not. He was a writer. What was his name? Big fellow. And we had somebody else on the show, and the girl says, one of the guests on the show, the girl said, I wanted to be a nun or something in her background. And this other writer who was sitting there says, I always wanted to be a monk. And I said, almost without thinking, you could be a monastery. Now, that may or may not be the funniest joke in the world, but at the time, it was perfect. I didn't stop and even think. It just came out. But it was funny because the guy was huge, and he had interrupted. So if you put all the relative things together, it made a funny picture.
I think that's a perfect example, isn't it, John?
It came out. He
Yes.
says, I've always wanted to be a monk. I said, you could be a monastery. And it was just that fast. May or may not be an original line, but it fitted there.
Well, that's the point I was just going to make, that the possibility of it having been a stock line is very remote.
Yeah, because that situation doesn't arise.
The difference between the comedy thought of a very heavy man, in other words, that word picture.
Word picture, and you could be a monastery, playing off of that,
right,
is a perfect illustration of
which only you could have done as a result of all these years of having had the background that you have.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it.